They say grief has a sound, but betrayal is quieter. Betrayal sits there, cross-legged in the front row, wearing your dead husband's favorite black dress and your necklace. I hadn't worn that necklace in years, small gold loops and an opal pendant. Harold bought me on our 25th anniversary. I'd kept it tucked away in my jewelry box, behind the small velvet bag with our initials embossed on it. Now it sat on the pale neck of a woman, 30 years my junior, just inches from where they'd laid Harold to rest. The funeral was at Westbrook Chapel, the same one where Harold's colleagues had gathered to bury 3 of their own over the past decade. Doctors like rituals. There's always a rhythm to it. Sharp suits, restrained sobs, and hollow eulogies from men who think emotion is a liability. I sat in the second row, not the first. The first row was reserved for the widow, of course. Only I wasn't there when they started placing the name cards. I was in the church office, finalizing the music. It was Harold's favorite hymn. I wanted to make sure they played the right version. When I came back, the front row had been claimed. She was already seated, legs crossed at the ankle, posture military perfect. Her name was Elise, his secretary, 29 years old if memory served. No one asked her to move, not even my son. Daniel sat beside her, his face unreadable. He gave me a polite nod as I took the second row seat beside my sister. She whispered, "Do you want me to say something?" I shook my head. Not here. Not today. The service began. Pastor Whitman read from Ecclesiastes. I stared at the back of Elise's head, at the sleek brown bun too smooth to be anything but professionally done. I remembered when my own hair used to fall in curls down my back. Before the grays, before the chemo scare, before I stopped being anything other than a dependable fixture in Harold's life. The pew beneath me was cold. After the sermon, we walked to the cemetery in a slow procession. I noticed Elise trailing just ahead of me, close enough that I could hear her murmur something to Daniel. He didn't respond. His hand stayed in his pocket. After the burial, people came up one by one. Former patients, neighbors, colleagues. "He was a great man," they said. "So sorry for your loss." I nodded, thanked them, held their hands a moment longer than necessary. I did not cry. Grief was not the main feeling, not anymore. Back home, the house was full of people. They helped themselves to wine, cheese plates, mini quiches I didn't order. I stood near the window, watching a blue jay peck at the lawn. Elise was already inside when I walked through the door. Somehow, she'd gotten there ahead of me. She stood near Harold's bookshelf, her hand on a spine I recognized. Courage to Heal, a book I'd recommended to him years ago when one of his patients had taken her life. I'd written a note inside it. Elise opened it and smiled. A very small smile. I walked up behind her, quiet. "I didn't know you were fond of Harold's books," I said. She turned. "He used to read me passages from this one," she said, her voice syrupy but steady. "He said it helped him understand things about himself." Interesting, I thought. He never once mentioned that to me. Her eyes flicked down to my necklace, now hers apparently. "This," she said, fingers grazing it, "was his favorite." "Mine too," I replied, and walked away before she could respond. I found Daniel in the kitchen. He was pouring himself a drink, scotch, probably Harold's Glenfiddich. He looked older than 35 today. Too serious. Too careful. "Did you know?" I asked him. He paused, mid-pour. "Know what?" I waited. He didn't answer. I left him there with the bottle and walked upstairs. Our bedroom door was closed. I opened it. Inside, Everything was as we'd left it 2 nights ago. His pajamas folded neatly, his glasses on the nightstand, his wedding ring still in the bowl by the sink. He hadn't worn it for months, said it was uncomfortable. Arthritis. I opened my jewelry box. The velvet bag was gone. Only the impression of it remained, like a body-shaped dent in a bed that had cooled. The house emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back after an unremarkable storm. The guests left their paper plates and empty wine glasses behind, as if their sorrow had taken a physical toll. They whispered goodbyes, offered practiced sympathy, and retreated into their intact lives. By sundown, only silence remained. I stood at the sink, rinsing out cups. Not because I had to, not because anyone expected it, but because I needed something to do with my hands, something other than ball them into fists. The velvet bag was still missing. I didn't confront Daniel about it that evening. I didn't ask Elise why she'd worn it, or how it came to be around her neck. I knew the answer. There are things you know in your bones. Just like I'd known, even before the funeral, that Harold had been slipping away from me, not just in age or health, but in loyalty, in spirit. We had a good marriage, by most accounts. 42 years. No affairs, at least none I knew of. We raised a child, survived the recession, lost his mother, buried my father. We had a rhythm, a life. I made him breakfast every morning. He kissed my forehead every night. But somewhere in the middle, I became the backdrop. The curtain to his performance. And then Elise arrived. She started as a temp, I remember. Needed a quick job while finishing a degree. Smiled too often, laughed too easily. Wore heels that clicked a bit too loud on clinic floors. Harold said she was efficient, said she lightened the mood. I began noticing the changes slowly. Harold working later, taking phone calls in other rooms, locking his briefcase. Then came the scent of expensive perfume on his collar. Not mine. I'd stopped wearing fragrance years ago. It interfered with his allergies, supposedly. Still, I said nothing. You learn to make peace with certain things in a marriage. A missed dinner here, a canceled weekend there. I told myself it was work. Always work. His patients needed him. He was exhausted. He was kind, even if distant. He never shouted. He remembered birthdays. And that, I told myself, was love. Now I wasn't so sure. That night, I opened the drawer where Harold kept the clinic receipts. Not because I expected to find anything, but because I couldn't sleep. Inside, among the usual insurance forms and prescription pads, was a small envelope addressed to E.H. I froze. E.H. Elise Howard. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside were 2 concert tickets. Last month. A symphony. The same evening, Harold told me he was attending a board dinner. There was also a small note scrawled in Harold's fast, careless script. You were radiant in blue. I haven't felt this young in decades. H. Blue. The dress. My necklace. My life. I put the envelope back, carefully. I didn't need to read it again. The words had already carved themselves somewhere deep, where even tears couldn't reach. I went to bed without brushing my teeth, without changing. I lay on Harold's side of the bed. His scent still clung faintly to the pillow, that familiar mix of aftershave and the unsaid. In the morning, Daniel called. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. He hadn't checked in for weeks before the funeral. I'm here, I said. Are you okay? Do you want the polite answer or the honest one? There was a pause. Honest? No, I said. I'm not okay. Another silence. Longer this time. I didn't know it would hurt you this much, he said quietly. What do you mean? The necklace. Elise. She didn't. He stopped. Tried again. Dad gave it to her months ago. I didn't think you'd notice. So he had known. You didn't think I'd notice my own necklace on another woman? In the front row at your father's funeral? I didn't think she'd wear it. I told her not to. But she did. And you let her sit there, Daniel. You let her sit in my place. His voice dropped. She said she wanted to be close. To whom? I asked. To the man who never wore his ring? Or to the woman whose life she replaced one lunch break at a time? He didn't answer. I need some time, I said, before he could try. Don't call tomorrow. Mom, not tomorrow. I hung up. It wasn't rage that filled me then. It was something colder. Not quite anger. Not yet revenge. Just the dawning realization that no one was going to defend me but me. That whatever dignity I still had, I'd have to rebuild brick by brick. And I would. But first, I made a list. Harold's lawyer, the clinic's accountant, my own financial advisor, the woman from the bank who used to send birthday cards. I wasn't going to start with confrontation. I would start with information. The morning after our call, Daniel left flowers on my doorstep. White lilies. Harold used to bring me those when we argued, as if beauty could erase insult. I didn't bring them inside. Instead, I left them out on the porch table. Let the sun dry them out. It felt appropriate. By noon, I was on the phone with Mr. Aldridge, Harold's longtime attorney. He was older than both of us, slow-speaking and careful. The kind of man who never wore short sleeves and always said ma'am, like he meant it. I'd like to review my husband's will, I said. A pause. Mrs. Harrington, I was just about to call you this week. We've received the final notarized copy. If you're free tomorrow, I can walk you through the estate distribution. Is it complicated? Not necessarily, he said slowly, though I imagine some parts may be surprising. Interesting choice of words. I'll be there at 10. I hung up and stared at the photo of Harold on the mantel, the one from our trip to Banff, the last time he looked at me like he really saw me. He was wearing a wool sweater I'd knitted for him, holding a thermos of coffee, grinning like a boy. I wondered if Elise had ever seen that version of him. I doubted it. The man he became with her was all posture and pretense. Harold had a version of himself for every audience. I used to think I knew the real one. Now I wasn't sure there had ever been just one. At 10 sharp the next morning, I sat across from Mr. Aldridge's tidy desk. The room smelled faintly of old books and lemon oil. He pushed the file toward me gently, as if it might sting. Your husband revised his will about 18 months ago, he said. Did he mention it to you? No. He nodded like he expected that. In the updated version, he made some changes. He listed them off like grocery items. The house, still in my name, but the land beneath it, transferred to a trust. The trust, managed by Daniel, with 40% access granted to Elise Howard in the event of Harold's death. His life insurance, half to me, half to a private beneficiary, whose name I didn't need spelled out. And the clinic shares? Those were never mine to begin with, but I'd always assumed Daniel would inherit them. Apparently not. A portion had already been gifted to Elise under something called a retention clause, whatever that meant. I didn't interrupt. I let him finish. When he closed the folder, he took off his glasses and looked at me. Are you all right? I'm tired, I said. But that's nothing new. Mrs. Harrington, call me May. He's dead. The formalities died with him. He smiled, just barely. May, you may have legal grounds to contest parts of this, especially if certain decisions were made under questionable influence. Oh, I'll contest it, I said calmly. Not out of spite, but out of principle. I thought you might. He handed me a set of papers. Let me know how you'd like to proceed, but don't wait too long. These things get messy if you hesitate. I left the office feeling lighter, oddly, as if finally reading the truth in black ink had lifted the weight of all my years of guessing. On the way home, I drove past the clinic. Elise's car was in the lot. Too clean, too red, too smug. A convertible Harold helped her pick out, if Daniel's offhand comment last spring was to be believed. I parked across the street. I wasn't going in, not today. But I wanted her to see me. Not furious, not broken, just present. So I waited. At 4:12 p.m., she came out. Black blazer, cream skirt, hair in that same precise twist. She didn't see me at first. Then she did. Our eyes met through the windshield. She didn't smile this time. She got into her car without looking back. I drove off before she pulled out. That evening, I pulled out my own files. Bank statements, deeds, the old joint accounts we never closed. My name was still on more than Harold realized. He hadn't been as thorough as he liked to think. Or maybe he just never thought I'd care to look. But I did. Now, I did. I called Claire Simmons, our former financial advisor. I want to set up a meeting. Of course, May. Is everything okay? No, I said. But it will be. Claire Simmons had always liked Harold. Everyone did. He was charming in that polished, non-threatening way that made people trust him. He made eye contact, remembered birthdays, and always spoke as if every conversation was a consultation. He even fooled me for 42 years. Claire greeted me with a polite but uncertain smile when I entered her office. May, it's good to see you. She meant, it's strange to see you here alone. I didn't sit right away. Instead, I stood by the window and looked out over the parking lot. Did Harold ever tell you I was bad with numbers? She blinked. No. Why would he? He told me. More than once. Said I didn't need to worry about finances. He had it handled. Claire folded her hands. Many couples divide responsibilities. That's not unusual. Except I paid for his medical school, I said, turning back to her. With a waitress job and a second-hand car, I drove into the ground. So, no, Claire. I don't think it's unreasonable to want to know where my money went. She nodded. Fair enough. Have a seat. Let's go through it together. We did. Over the next hour, I learned more about my life than I had in the past decade. Harold had opened new accounts in his name alone, made regular transfers to something called a consulting fund that, according to Claire, didn't pass the smell test. He had set up monthly deposits into Elise Howard's account for administrative duties, none of which matched her official salary at the clinic. And then there was the jewelry. He'd made 2 large withdrawals in the past year from our joint account, both just under the reportable limit. I knew now where those had gone. Around Elise's neck. On her hand, perhaps. Maybe in a box she'd pull out on anniversaries she had no right to celebrate. I want to restructure everything, I said, my voice even. Close the joint account. Move my assets. Freeze anything with my name on it that links to Daniel or Elise. Claire hesitated. Are you certain? I'm 66 years old. I was married for 42. I am painfully certain. She didn't argue. By the end of the meeting, my entire financial footprint looked different. Leaner, protected, and mine. When I got home, I made tea and opened the drawer where Harold kept our family records. At the bottom, beneath old tax returns and birthday cards, I found a small stack of receipts, mostly cash, mostly vague. One caught my eye. It was from a hotel just outside town. A wellness resort, according to the logo. Dated 2 years ago. The same weekend I'd flown to visit my sister after her surgery. I remembered how Harold had encouraged me to go. "You haven't seen Helen in ages," he'd said. "She'll appreciate the company." He didn't come with me. Claimed he had a patient with an urgent condition. Turns out he was busy, just not at the clinic. The receipt was for 2 nights. Champagne package. Couples massage. I sat at the kitchen table staring at it for a long time. It wasn't the betrayal. That was already part of the architecture now, like a crack in the ceiling you stop bothering to fix. It was the ease of it, the repetition, the gall. I took out a notebook and began to write. Not for publication, not for confrontation, just for clarity. Entry 1. Things I let go. The perfume on his shirt. The locked briefcase. The canceled anniversary trip. The jokes about how emotional I was. The necklace that disappeared, then reappeared around someone else's throat. Entry 2. Things I will no longer tolerate. Apologies from people who knew. Silence from my own son. Property handed to strangers. My own kindness being used against me. The next day, I called Daniel. "We need to talk," I said. "When?" "Now." He arrived 30 minutes later, looking tired, unshaven, not like himself. "Mom, don't," I said. "Just sit." He did. I slid the hotel receipt across the table. He didn't touch it. "You knew," I said. He didn't deny it. "For how long?" He rubbed his jaw. "A year. Maybe more." "And you said nothing." "He was my father," he said helplessly. "And I was your mother." That shut him up. I poured tea. The sound filled the silence like a small storm. "I've changed my accounts. You'll receive nothing from the trust unless I approve it. The house is being reviewed for retransfer. Your inheritance is paused, pending legal review." His head shot up. "Mom, I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm educating you." "I didn't do anything." "Exactly." He stared at me. And for the first time since Harold died, I felt seen. Not as a grieving wife, not as a discarded woman, but as myself. May Harrington, unfolding. Daniel left without finishing his tea. Left the cup on the table, half full, the way Harold used to do. Like he always had somewhere more important to be. Like my time wasn't quite worth finishing the cup for. I watched him drive off through the front window, his tail lights blinking red at the end of the street. Part of me expected him to turn back, to knock again, to say something real. But he didn't. The silence that followed was not unfamiliar. I sat for a long time at the table, staring at that cup, the one I'd given him with steady hands and a level voice. And when I finally poured it down the drain, it felt like a sacrament, a quiet burial of all the excuses I'd accepted for far too long. That evening, I opened the cedar box from the top shelf of the bedroom closet. It had been Harold's, though I'd always suspected he kept nothing inside that he actually cared about. Just old cufflinks, expired IDs, and paper clips. But beneath the junk was a slim envelope marked policy notes. Inside were several insurance papers, one of which made my heart skip. A long-term care policy listing Daniel as the sole emergency contact and financial proxy. That hadn't been discussed. Not with me. The contact phone number wasn't even mine. It was Elise's. Her name sat there on the paper, typed in calmly by someone in a back office, as if it made perfect sense that a man would leave his care decisions to a woman he never married and a son who couldn't face his mother with the truth. I put the paper back into the envelope and returned it to the box. Then I went to the guest room, what Harold always called my room when he was irritated or joking. I stood there for a moment, looking at the twin bed with the knitted throw. The room I'd spent more than a few nights in over the years when he had important calls, late into the night, or when my questions became too sharp for his comfort. That room had never belonged to me. It belonged to his silence. I closed the door gently, then locked it for no one but myself. The next morning, I made my first stop at the county courthouse. The woman at the clerk's desk looked up with a practiced smile. "I need to update my power of attorney," I said, "and file an addendum to my will." Her fingers paused on the keyboard. "Do you have the forms already?" "No," I replied, "but I know exactly what I want." It took 2 hours, 3 signatures, and 1 notary visit. Then I called Marjorie, my oldest friend. We hadn't seen each other in nearly a year, though we spoke often enough on the phone. Life had gotten in the way. Harold's appointments, Daniel's needs, the quiet erosion of time. "Lunch?" she asked after I explained. "Today?" "Yes." Her voice brightened. "I'll drive." She picked me up in her silver Buick, the one with the cracked dashboard and broken radio. I loved that car. It smelled like peppermint and hand cream. "I read about Elise in the paper last month," Marjorie said as we buckled up. "Some charity gala. Her picture was right next to Harold's." That explained the call I got from church that week, the one that started with, "Did you know?" and ended with a sharp silence when I said, "No." We had lunch at Lambert's, a place Harold never liked. "Too noisy, too casual," he used to say. But I loved it. The waitress called me sweetheart, and the fries came in a tin cup. Over soup, I told Marjorie everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. Just listened, the way real friends do when they've known you long enough to spot what you're not saying. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You always were too generous," she said, "but never stupid." I nodded. "And now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "I want my name back." That night, I began sorting through the attic. Boxes and boxes of our shared life. I labeled each: keep, donate, trash. Under one pile, I found a letter Harold had never mailed, addressed to someone in Boston. No return address. I didn't open it. Some ghosts don't deserve the dignity of explanation. Instead, I took out my own stationery, the kind with the pale green border I used to write thank you notes after dinner parties. I wrote only one sentence. I was not absent. I was erased. Then I folded it, placed it in the top drawer of Harold's desk, and locked it. For myself. For Elise, if she ever comes back. For Daniel, if he ever learns to look me in the eye without shame. The call came just after 9 a.m. "Mrs. Harrington?" a soft voice asked. "This is Teresa from Dr. Klein's office. I'm calling to confirm your appointment this afternoon." I hesitated. Harold's cardiologist. He'd booked the appointment 2 months ago. Routine follow-up, he'd said, but insisted I come along. "They always miss something unless someone's paying attention," he told me. He hadn't canceled it before he died, and they hadn't updated the files. "I won't be coming," I said. "My husband passed away." "Oh, I'm so sorry," the woman stammered. "I had no idea." "Neither did I," said, and hung up. It had become my morning ritual, answering for a man who was no longer here, managing the remnants of his life while deciding how much of mine was left to salvage. Later that day, I called Elise. It wasn't rage, it wasn't curiosity. It was something simpler. I wanted to hear how she would lie when she no longer had Harold's presence to back her up. She answered on the third ring. May? Her voice was small, cautious. You have something that belongs to me, I said. She didn't pretend not to understand. The necklace. Yes. I'll drop it off. No, I said. You'll bring it to me. And you'll sit down while I decide what else you've taken. There was a pause. I didn't take anything you didn't give up. I almost laughed. Bold. Arrogant. A woman who'd been handed so much she started believing it was earned. Elise, I said calmly, Harold is dead. That makes you redundant. She arrived that evening. No makeup, no tight dress. A scarf over the bun this time, like she'd aged 5 years in 1 week. I didn't invite her in. I stepped outside and sat on the porch chair. She handed me a small velvet bag, the same one that used to sit in my drawer beneath the birthday cards. I opened it. The necklace was there, untangled and whole. I didn't mean for it to be a spectacle, she said, sitting stiffly across from me. But it was. He wanted me there. And he wanted me invisible. She didn't reply. I examined the opal. It hadn't lost its color. Still soft blue in the fading light. Still catching the gold like a secret. How long? I asked. She flinched. 3 years, give or take. 3 years, I repeated. That's longer than most marriages. We weren't... Don't insult me. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she said it. He was tired of being adored. He wanted to be understood. I looked at her, at the raw, trembling truth she thought would excuse her place at his bedside. He told me, she added, quieter now, that you were cold. I nodded slowly. That's what weak men say when women stop apologizing. She looked away. Do you love him? I asked. I did. And did he love you? I thought so. But he didn't leave you anything real, did he? Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, she looked young. Not sexy, not threatening, just young, and very, very foolish. No, she whispered. He didn't. I stood. I want you to understand something, Elise. You thought you'd stepped into a marriage that had gone stale, that Harold needed rescuing. But what you never saw was what came before you. You got the version of him that was already unraveling. And you mistook decay for depth. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. You weren't his future. You were his escape hatch. She looked like she might cry, but didn't. I turned to go. Wait, she said. Why didn't you fight me? At the funeral? After? I paused at the door. Because you don't fight the wind, Elise. You board up your house and wait for the storm to pass. She left without another word. I went inside, placed the necklace back in its box, and locked it away. Not because I still cherished it, but because it was mine. And I'd had enough things taken from me with a smile and a sorry. The next envelope arrived 3 days later. Thick, cream-colored, hand-addressed. The kind Harold used when he wanted to make something look official but still personal. The return address wasn't his office, though. It was the Harrington Clinic, now run by a board Daniel chaired. Inside was a letter on letterhead. Dear Mrs. Harrington, as part of our efforts to transition operations and clarify ownership of clinic assets, we are reaching out to address the administrative adjustments following Dr. Harold Harrington's passing. Attached is a summary of holdings currently registered in his name, as well as forms regarding the reassignment or relinquishment of any non-transferable properties or financial shares. Please contact us within 14 business days to avoid complications. No signature. Just the printed name of the clinic's administrator and a rubber-stamped logo. I flipped through the attachments. In tidy bullet points, they had listed everything Harold had touched. Part ownership of the building, pending insurance claims, remaining pharmaceutical contracts. Most of it seemed routine until I reached the last page. There, at the bottom, was a line I hadn't expected to see. Annual Discretionary Medical Grant Fund, $22,000 sole oversight. Elise Howard, by verbal designation, pending formal transfer. I read it twice. He had given her oversight of a clinic fund, meant for patients, for families, for things he used to brag about in speeches. No one gets turned away here. And now she controlled it? Not officially, not yet. But it was in writing. There was always a paper trail with Harold. That evening, I wrote a letter. Not to Elise, not to Daniel, but to the board. To whom it may concern, I am May Harrington, widow of Dr. Harold Harrington. I am in possession of documents and legal authorizations regarding various holdings under the Harrington name, including, but not limited to, land use rights, financial trusts, and donor relationships associated with the clinic. Before I take formal steps to challenge the validity of recent designations made without my knowledge or consent, I am requesting a meeting with the full board to discuss the future of the Harrington name in association with your institution. Respectfully, Mrs. May Harrington. I mailed it the next morning with tracking. A week later, the call came. Mrs. Harrington, the voice said. This is Talia Mendez, current chair of the Harrington Clinic Board. We'd like to invite you to our next session. When? Tuesday, 11 a.m. Will Elise be there? A pause. She no longer holds an active role at the clinic. That arrangement has been reviewed. Meaning? She's stepping down voluntarily. I smiled without meaning to. I'll be there. Tuesday came. I wore gray, not black, not blue. Gray like smoke, like a warning before fire. The boardroom was long and clinical, glass-topped and cold. 8 faces sat around the table. 4 I knew from charity events, 2 from Christmas cards, 1 from our son's school board. And Daniel. He looked tired. They gave me coffee I didn't touch. We'd like to offer our condolences, the chair said. I nodded once. Then she continued. Mrs. Harrington, we've reviewed the documentation. We believe Dr. Harrington's intent was informal in several areas, especially where verbal designation cannot be legally enforced. Are you referring to the grant fund? She nodded. Yes. Given the lack of formal transfer and your position as surviving spouse, we are prepared to offer you full oversight of the grant. I don't want oversight, I said. The room shifted slightly. Papers paused mid-turn. Pens hovered. I want to restructure it, rename it, redirect its purpose. Talia cleared her throat. To what end? For women over 60, I said. Women whose partners die and leave them with more questions than answers. For quiet hospital bills, rent, heating, legal counsel. Daniel looked at me sharply. I see, Talia said. That's unorthodox. It's overdue. There was silence. Then, we'll review the paperwork. Good, I said, standing. I'll have my lawyer send over the draft. As I walked out, Daniel caught up to me. Mom, wait. I turned. I didn't know about the fund, he said. I believe you. His shoulders relaxed, just slightly. But you know now, I added. And that's what matters. He looked down. I don't know what to say. Try thank you, I said. And mean it this time. It rained the next day. Not hard. Just enough to blur the windows and make the porch smell like old leaves. I watched the drops slide down the glass, one after another, like seconds I couldn't get back. I hadn't heard from Daniel since the board meeting. Not a call, not a text. Silence had become our family's native language. spoken fluently, inherited. I wasn't waiting for him. Instead, I spent the morning reviewing documents with my lawyer. The trust Harold had set up, the adjustments I'd requested, the revocation of Daniel's financial authority. Every page had been read, signed, and filed. "What next?" Francis asked, leaning back in his chair. "Next," I said, "we shift the money." He smiled. "To the trust for the grant fund?" "To that, and to my granddaughter." "Ah," he said, "the younger Harrington." "No," I corrected, "not Daniel's daughter, my sister's granddaughter, Carly." Francis looked up. "You're naming her? She's the only one who's shown up without needing something. Does she know?" "No, and I'd like to keep it that way. For now." We arranged the details. A quiet trust. Conditions that protected her from being pressured. No access before 30. No early withdrawals unless for health or education. I wanted her to know support, not dependence. When the papers were done, I signed them with steady hands. Back home, I made tea and turned on the old radio. Not the smart speaker Harold insisted we buy, the one that called him Dr. Harrington in that irritating robotic voice. No. I turned the dial by hand, found a station playing Billie Holiday, and sat with the past. I thought about what Elise had said. He wanted to be understood. And maybe he did. But not by me. Not in a way that required truth. Harold had liked admiration, gratitude. That's why he preferred patients to peers, nurses to doctors, women who said thank you over women who said you're wrong. I wasn't angry anymore, just awake. Later that afternoon, I received a call from the clinic. A woman named Aruna. She introduced herself as the new administrator overseeing community relations. "We've approved your proposal," she said, "and we'd like to offer you a ceremonial role, an annual appearance, if you're interested." "I'm not," I said. "But thank you." "May I ask why?" "Because women like me are useful when we're silent, and ornamental when we speak. I'm no longer interested in being either." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Understood. Would you be open to a press statement instead? Your name attached? Your words unchanged?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said, "but no photograph." "Of course." I sent her a short note that evening. "Widowhood is not a collapse. It is a reintroduction. We are not broken. We are no longer edited. No signature, no flourish, just truth." The next day, I cleared out the top drawer of Harold's desk. Inside was a file labeled personal. I hadn't opened it in months. Not since his diagnosis, when we were still playing at being a team. Inside were receipts from vacations I hadn't been on, letters I hadn't read. One addressed to H, unsigned. The handwriting wasn't Elise's. It didn't matter anymore. I burned the letters in the fireplace, watched the edges curl and blacken. There was a strange peace in it. Not revenge, not cleansing, just closure. When the fire died down, I swept the ashes into a tin Harold used to keep loose screws in. I put it on the shelf beside the photos he hadn't bothered to take down, the two of us on the beach, Daniel as a toddler, the family dog we'd buried in the yard. I stared at them for a long time. Then I took the photo of our wedding day, me in lace, him in a rented tux, and turned it face down. It stayed that way. Daniel showed up on Saturday. No warning, no text. Just the sound of his car door slamming in the driveway and footsteps on the porch I hadn't invited him back to. I saw him through the window, hesitant, hands in the pockets of his too expensive coat. The same coat I'd bought him last Christmas. He hadn't thanked me then either. Just said, "It's a bit snug in the shoulders." He knocked once. Waited. Knocked again. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Hi, Mom." I said nothing. He glanced past me like he might see something useful inside. An opening. A softer version of me. One that used to offer coffee before questions. I wanted to talk. So talk. He shifted his weight. "Not out here." "Then choose your words carefully." That made him flinch. "I saw the papers," he said finally. "The trust. The clinic." "I assumed you would. You gave Carly almost everything." "I gave Carly what hadn't already been wasted." He looked at me then. Really looked. "Why her?" "Because she listened. Because she didn't make my silence a condition for her comfort." He blinked. "I didn't mean to." "You meant everything you didn't say," I interrupted. "Every time you looked the other way. Every time you defended your father instead of asking me how I was surviving him." Daniel's jaw clenched. "He was a complicated man." "No," I said. "He was a coward, and I spent too many years decorating the cage he built for me." He looked at the floor. "I'm not here to fight," he said. I wanted to say I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not protecting you, for choosing him, for not seeing what you needed." I didn't say anything. Let the words settle like dust. "I know it's too late for some things," he added, "but I don't want to lose you." "You already did," I said softly. "But whether or not you find me again, that's on you now." He swallowed, nodded. "Can I come in?" "Not today." He hesitated, then turned and walked back to the car. I watched him drive away. Inside, I boiled water, chose the good teacup. The one with the pale green flowers, the one Harold never liked because the handle was too small for his fingers. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote, "Letter to Carly, not to be sent. Yet. My dear, if you're reading this someday, it means I trusted the world enough to hand you something fragile. Not money, not land, but clarity. The kind that only comes after fire. You were kind when no one asked you to be. And that, my darling, is a form of resistance. Never forget that kindness without expectation is a weapon no one sees coming. I didn't leave you everything because I thought you needed it. I left it because I believe you'll never become the sort of person who demands it. That's rarer than you know. With love, may I sealed the letter and placed it inside the back of the photo album, between the pages with my sister's wedding and Carly's 3rd birthday. Later that evening, I walked to the back garden. The lilacs had started to wither, summer dying in slow motion. I knelt beside them and clipped what was left. Inside, I placed them in the old ceramic vase Harold hated. It looked perfect on the windowsill. The following week, the invitations arrived. White envelopes with silver lettering, embossed in a way that screamed good taste and better money. Daniel and his wife hosting a memorial gala in Harold's honor, a fundraiser, cocktail attire. Proceeds to benefit the Harrington Medical Fellowship. I read the invitation twice. My name was not printed on the host list, not even as Mrs. May Harrington, widow of the late Dr. Harold Harrington. Just a quiet afterthought among 100 other names typed for posterity. There was no mention of the new grant fund, no reference to the trust I had restructured, or the letter I had written that the clinic now framed in the hallway. No, this gala was not about Harold's legacy. It was about Daniel's. He'd taken his father's funeral and turned it into a ladder. I poured myself a drink, not tea this time, but the small bottle of brandy Harold had kept behind the top shelf, reserved for special guests. He'd never considered me one, but I took it anyway. I sat on the porch and let the evening cool my skin. Marjorie called just after 7. "You going?" she asked, voice muffled by wind or laundry. "To what?" "The memorial gala." "Got mine today." "Did you open it before or after the trash can?" She laughed. "Before, but barely." "I don't know yet." "You should." "Why?" "Because the version of Harold they'll talk about in that ballroom isn't the one who left you out of his will. I'm not interested in rewriting history." "You're not. You're reminding them you were part of it." I didn't answer. "Wear the necklace," she added. "The one he gave away. Reclaimed things have power." The line went quiet after that. I stared at the sky. Cocktail attire. I hadn't dressed up since the funeral. Not really. A cardigan here, a pair of pressed slacks there, but nothing made for arrival. Still, I went upstairs, opened the armoire, and ran my hands along the fabric. I chose navy blue, not black, not mourning, a color that said, "I'm not grieving. I'm remembering on my own terms." I took the necklace from the locked drawer and fastened it myself. It sat just right. Familiar, but no longer sentimental. I wore it like armor. On the night of the gala, I arrived precisely 15 minutes after it began. Not early, not late. Enough to be seen. The ballroom was glass and gold, all shine and performance. Waiters in white jackets, champagne in tall, trembling flutes, a quartet playing something that sounded expensive. I didn't look for Daniel. I let him find me. And he did. He came up, eyes wide, voice careful. "You came. Why wouldn't I?" He looked down. "I wasn't sure. You sent an invitation, didn't you?" "Well, yes, but..." "Then I belong here." He nodded. "You look nice. Don't lie." "I'm not." He hesitated. "Thank you for the fund." "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know. But still, he said it. And that mattered." Later, during the speeches, Daniel stood at the podium, his voice steady, rehearsed. "My father was a man of vision," he said. "He believed in legacy, in resilience, in creating space for others to thrive." I sipped my drink and thought, and in secrets. "And of course," Daniel continued, "he couldn't have done any of it without the support of those closest to him." He looked at me then, a long, deliberate pause. "Especially my mother." The room turned. For a moment I was visible again, not as a footnote, but as a chapter. I didn't smile, but I met his gaze. Held it. When the applause came, it was soft. Polite. But enough. I finished my drink, placed the empty glass on the tray of a passing waiter, and walked out before dessert. Reclaimed things have power. Marjorie was right. But leaving when you choose to, that's power too. I didn't wait for Daniel to call after the gala. He would, eventually, with thanks or explanations, or the kind of nostalgia that usually arrives too late to be useful. But I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for invitations, not for inclusion in a version of the world where I'd only ever been expected to smile, nod, and stay out of the way. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, sorting through papers I hadn't looked at in years. Not legal forms this time, not finances or deeds. Letters. Handwritten ones, mostly mine. Some yellowed at the edges. Some never sent. I found one addressed to Harold from 1997. I'd written it after our 25th anniversary, when he missed dinner because of an emergency consult that turned out to be a golf weekend. "Dear H, you used to notice things. That I liked my toast on the lighter side. That I slept better with a breeze through the window. That I needed quiet more than flowers. You used to notice me. Sometimes I wonder if I disappeared 5 years ago and no one told me." I never gave him that letter. I'd rewritten it in my head a dozen times. smoothed it out, removed the sting, folded it into a joke. But I never delivered the truth. Maybe if I had, things would have changed. Or maybe not. That afternoon, Carly called. She was breathless, excited, talking a mile a minute. "Grandma May, I just saw the article. The one about the grant fund. They quoted you. I didn't even know you were working on something like that." I smiled. "You don't have to call me that," I said. "Grandma?" I was never really given the chance to be one, not properly. "Well, you are to me." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "Then I'm honored." "You always do things quietly," Carly said, "and they always hit harder than anyone expects. That's the advantage of being underestimated." "I want to help," she said suddenly. "With the fund?" "With anything. Writing, outreach, social media. You know, young people things." I laughed, genuinely. "All right, but no hashtags with my name in them." "Deal." After we hung up, I sat with the quiet for a moment. It no longer felt oppressive. It felt earned. That evening, I walked through the garden, scissors in hand. The hydrangeas had started to fade into their autumn tones. Dusky purple, smoky green. I clipped a few, tied them with twine, and placed them in a jar on the table near the front door. A small note underneath. "For the neighbor who always waves. We see more than you think." Sometimes kindness doesn't need a return address. Later, I sat at the desk in Harold's old study. Not to mourn, not to clean, to reclaim. I opened a new notebook and wrote across the top of the first page, "A guide to women who remember." We remember everything. We are not relics, we are archives. Grief does not make us weaker, it makes us precise. We do not raise our voices because we've learned to speak only when it matters most. We are not looking for permission. We are building something that cannot be stolen. I closed the book and placed it next to the envelope I'd sealed for Carly. One day, maybe it would matter to her. Not the money, not the names, but the fact that someone chose her. Because she showed up with both hands open, not one stretched out in need. I saw Elise again, by accident. It was late afternoon, the sky the color of bruised linen, and I'd stopped by the market to pick up a jar of fig preserves. Harold used to scoff at them. "Too sweet, no bite," he'd say. But I liked them. Always had. She was standing in the bakery aisle, holding a loaf of sourdough, like it might tell her something useful. Her hair was shorter now, less polished. The shine had dulled. Even from behind, I could tell she walked differently. Not defeated, just slower. She turned and saw me before I could pretend not to notice. "May." "Elise." A silence passed between us. Not awkward, just full. Like a room with all the furniture gone, but the outline of where it used to be still visible. "I heard about the fund," she said. "I imagine you did. They mentioned it at the clinic board newsletter, said it was your idea, that you structured it alone." "I did?" She nodded. "It's a good idea." I looked at her, not searching, just looking. "Did you think I wouldn't do anything?" I asked. "I didn't know what to think," she admitted. "He always said you weren't interested in those things." "That's because he never asked." Her mouth twitched, not a smile. A concession. "Elise, let me tell you something you might not understand yet. Some women stay quiet not because they're weak, but because they're exhausted. Because we carry things you'll never see and don't have the luxury of putting them down just to be heard." She said nothing, but she listened. "I don't hate you," I added. She blinked. "Why not?" "Because you were only ever allowed to be what he gave you permission to be, I know what that's like. The sourdough still hung from her hand. He made you feel chosen, I said gently. But you were never the one who was asked to stay. That landed. She looked down, throat tightening, the way someone does when they realize their story was always a supporting role. I'm trying to do better, she said after a moment. Good. I'm going back to school. Social work. That suits you. I hope so. We stood there for another minute. Then I said, I hope the next time you love someone, you love yourself first. She nodded. Thank you. I left her there, between the pastries and the bread, surrounded by the smell of cinnamon and something trying to rise. At home, I placed the preserves on the kitchen shelf, made toast, and sat by the window. The light was soft, low, the kind that turns everything gold for 15 minutes and then vanishes like it was never there. I thought about Harold, not about the affair, not the lies, just the boyish doctor with the 2 large hands and the cautious smile who once told me I was his beginning. I was. But he didn't stay for the middle, and that's the thing about men like him. They fall in love with the idea of loyalty, not the work of it. Still, I did love him. That's the part no one talks about. That you can hold fury in one hand and grief in the other, and neither cancels the other out. I washed my plate, dried it, placed it back exactly where it belonged. Then I took the necklace, my necklace, and laid it in the drawer beside my glasses. Not because I was hiding it, but because it no longer needed to speak louder than I did. It had done its part. So had I. The first winter without Harold came like a guest who didn't knock, just walked in, took off its coat, and made itself comfortable. The mornings were colder than usual. The heater clicked on with a groan that sounded older than the house. I started sleeping with an extra blanket, the one Daniel made in middle school art class. Too short for the bed, too bright for the room, but it covered just enough of me to feel like something was still there. The silence no longer felt heavy, just present. Grief was no longer something I carried. It had settled, like old dust in corners I didn't clean as often. I could walk past Harold's study now without stopping. The wedding photo stayed face down, but I didn't feel the need to move it anymore. Let it lie. I spent most mornings writing, not for anyone else, just for me. Notes, memories, small observations, a list of things I'd once been afraid to say aloud. I called it Truths Nobody Clapped For. Page 1 read, I was a good wife, even when he wasn't a good husband. I was a mother, not a shield. I deserved questions before judgment. I was never cold. I was tired. Silence was not agreement. It was survival. The list grew every day. Sometimes I'd write one line and stare out the window for an hour. Other times, I filled 3 pages before lunch. Carly came by on Sundays. She brought soup or books or nothing at all. She never came to check in. She came to sit, to talk. Sometimes to cry, though she always apologized for it. Don't, I told her once. Tears are currency. Spend them how you like. She smiled. You always say things like that. Like what? Like you've already lived twice. Maybe I had. One morning, she brought a folder. I started writing a proposal, she said, sliding it across the table. For expanding the fund, adding outreach programs, maybe even a mobile unit. I opened it, read the first page, clear, confident, purposeful. You wrote this? She nodded, cheeks pink. I thought you might hate it. I think it's better than anything Harold ever put his name on. She looked like she might cry again. I poured more tea instead. That evening, I went upstairs and pulled out the storage box under the bed. Not the one with old clothes or photos. the other one. The one with the journals Harold never knew I kept. I flipped through the pages, found the year Carly was born. 2000. Daniel said not to visit, said it would confuse the baby. I sent a gift anyway. Elise called to say thank you. Her voice sounded younger than it should have. Maybe that's what keeps men, the illusion of inexperience. I tore the page out, folded it, placed it in an envelope. To Carly. When you're ready. There are things we share and things we wait to share. In the following weeks, I started walking again, down the neighborhood path, past the bench Harold used to sit on when he claimed to be getting air. I sat there once myself, gloves in my lap, breath rising in small clouds. A man passed by, mid-60s, walking his dog. He nodded. I nodded back. Cold morning? He said. It's January. Cold is the point. He laughed. Fair. We didn't speak again, but I saw him again the next day, and the day after that. We never exchanged names, just acknowledgement. Sometimes that's enough. That night, I wrote one more line in the notebook. Starting again is not loud. It's noticing someone's breath in the cold and realizing yours still makes fog, too. Spring came slowly, like an apology, whispered too late to change anything, but just in time to matter a little. The tulips I hadn't bothered to cut last year came back, defiant and bright. Pink, yellow, a single white one I didn't remember planting. I stood on the porch in my robe and watched them sway, nodding gently in a wind that didn't ask permission. Carly had taken over the administrative side of the fund. She had a new binder every time she visited. Charts, testimonials, letters from women I would never meet, who were now buying groceries with dignity or sitting in courtrooms with lawyers they could finally afford. One had written, I thought starting over meant becoming someone else, but I stayed me. I just got louder. I framed it, put it in the hallway where Harold's diploma used to hang. Daniel came by the house once more that season. He didn't knock right away, just stood on the porch, staring at the door, holding something wrapped in brown paper. When I opened it, he cleared his throat. It's for you. I took it without speaking, unwrapped it slowly. A photograph, black and white. Me, from years ago, maybe 1979. Sitting on the back steps with a book in my hand, eyes closed against the sun, hair long, mouth soft. Where did you get this? Dad kept it in his wallet. Always. I looked at the image, tried to feel something, didn't. Why are you showing me this now? Because I think I need to stop defending someone who gave you so little. I looked up at him. And? I'm sorry. For? For letting you carry the weight of his choices. For not seeing the difference between love and performance. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out another envelope. I spoke to the board. I'm stepping down. I blinked. Why? Because it was never mine to shape. I nodded once. That's the first decision your father would have hated that I can respect. He laughed, surprised. That was a good one. I didn't smile, but I didn't close the door either. Before he left, he said, Do you ever think about forgiving him? I looked at the photo in my hand, then at my son, Harold's son. No, I said, but I think I've stopped needing to. That night, I finally opened the last envelope I'd avoided since the funeral. A letter, dated 6 months before Harold died. May. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you found the things I couldn't say when I was alive. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for understanding. Just this. You were the only person who ever truly frightened me, because you saw through everything and still stayed. That's not weakness. It's a kind of love I never deserved. I'm sorry I mistook your quiet for absence. It was always presence, stronger than I could be. H. I read it twice. Then I folded it, placed it in the drawer beneath my scarves, and closed it. Not to forget. Just to let it rest. The next morning I bought a new journal, leather-bound, blue. I wrote Carly's name on the inside cover and left the rest blank. When she came for tea, I handed it to her. What's this? A place to put the things you don't want to carry anymore. She opened it gently, smiled. You always give me things that don't weigh anything until later. That's the idea. We sat on the porch. She poured the tea. I watched the white tulip bend in the breeze, then straighten again. Grandma May, she said suddenly. Yes? I think you saved me. No, I said. You saved yourself. I just noticed. And that, in the end, is what I wish someone had done for me. I woke early on the morning of my 67th birthday. No phone calls, no cards waiting, just the slow light of spring finding its way through the lace curtains. I sat up, let my feet touch the cold floor, and stayed there for a while. Not thinking, just existing. That was new. By breakfast, I'd made a list. Not of regrets, of returns. My name, spoken with respect. My time, unbent for others' convenience. My silence, reclaimed and repurposed. My home, no longer someone else's proof of success. My voice, steady and mine. Carly called it noon. Lunch today? She asked. I'd like that. Anywhere you want, and no arguing. I chose a quiet place with big windows and bad service, the kind of spot Harold would have hated. Too many students, too little formality. Carly arrived with a small bouquet of marigolds and a book wrapped in brown paper. Not for reading, she said, for remembering. It was a blank journal. Inside, she'd written, You taught me that presence is a kind of protest, that watching is not the same as staying silent, that grief can be architecture if you let it. I closed the book and placed it beside my plate. You're going to be someone people remember, I told her. You already are, she replied. We didn't linger after the check. Goodbyes didn't need to be heavy. At home, I opened the windows, let in the fresh air, the scent of cut grass and sun-warmed soil. I walked through each room of the house, touching the backs of chairs, the corners of frames, the chipped edge of the banister Harold always meant to fix. I didn't want to leave this house. People assumed I would. Sell it. Move somewhere smaller, easier. But this wasn't a burden anymore. It was proof I'd outlasted everything that once tried to shrink me. I made tea, wrote a short note. To whom it may concern, I was not a woman undone by death. I was a woman remade by it. Let no one tell you what grief should look like. Let no one inherit your silence. I didn't sign it. That night, I found the old box again, the one with the letters Harold had kept. Some were mine, some weren't. I didn't open them, just placed them all in a brown envelope and wrote across the front, Returned to sender. I didn't need to read his words to know they weren't written for me. I lit the fire one last time that season, not out of cold, but out of choice. The flames curled slowly around the paper, soft, final. The room filled with warmth, not weight. When the fire went out, I sat in the dark and whispered the truth I never got to say in all those years of making things easier for everyone else. I was here. I mattered, even when it was inconvenient. The next morning, I stepped outside barefoot. felt the dirt between my toes. The white tulip had dropped its petals. All 5, scattered like quiet declarations. I picked one up, pressed it between the pages of Carly's journal. A memory, not a relic. And as I closed the book, I spoke. Not to Harold, not to Daniel, not to Elise, but to the part of me that waited so long to be chosen. You're free now. If you're still reading, leave a comment. If you felt this in your chest, share it with someone who's been silenced. If you ever forgot your own worth, write it down, speak it out loud, frame it, defend it. Because dignity doesn't ask. It declares,